and Undead's working real hard to get everything right. So welcome. Thanks for popping in, and I'm sure we'll get this straightened out. I think we're just going to kind of free flow it today. There's a few things that we're talking about discussing, and I'm not sure exactly what the progression is going to be, but we'll have a little bit of everything. I think we'll talk a little bit about Alpha Bank, a little bit about the DNC hack, obviously any of the mainstream Spygate stuff. I think one of the main things we wanted to talk about was sort of a exercise in who would you talk to if or who would you put in front of Congress and question if you had your choice of anyone in the world. And I think that's a fun topic. So I think Undead's back.
Hey, MB, and I apologize to everybody. So I think I figured out what the technical issue was, and obviously that's not how we plan to start the show. But as MB said, I think kind of working out the technical kinks, and I don't think we'll have that issue again. So
cool. Sounds good. Now I think we're good. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're good to go. So as MB was just saying, I think this is just a good opportunity for us to kind of kick back and talk a little bit about what Congress could be doing right now. I think MB and I have spoke about this before, and MB, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, I guess there's two schools of thought right now, and one school of thought is that Congress should jump on this right away, and they should start issuing subpoenas today and really get going on this. And then the other school of thought is they should sort of sit back and wait for John Durham to release his report and then take their lead from John Durham. And I suspect that's the one that Congress is a little bit more inclined to follow. But I'm sort of in the first school of thought. I think Congress should jump on this right now. I think they should start issuing subpoenas. So they should push this out there and get going on their work, because even as we learned in the New York Times article a few days ago, it didn't sound like John Durham's report was done. It didn't sound like it had been submitted. So if you're sitting around waiting for Durham's report, whenever he submits it, you're probably looking at a few more months just to go through the redaction process. And once you get to that point, you might be 5 or 6 months down the road, and then all of a sudden, you're fighting with people to get subpoenas in there, and you're sort of behind the 8 ball. And as we've seen before, some of these people you put under subpoena, obviously they're going to fight it, but we've seen it in a number of instances where they just blow it off. So I'm certainly in the first school of thought. I think there's enough leads and enough problems that are already identified that Congress can get going and truly utilizing their oversight function, particularly, sort of piggybacking off our discussion from a couple of days ago, where sort of this metadata collection program that's out there, that's really not at the center of Russiagate. That's really truly within their oversight function, because part of that was authorized by congressional action. They wrote that into into law a couple years ago. So to see that those programs potentially being abused or misinterpreted or misapplied, that's squarely within their oversight function, even if there's not necessarily a crime there. So that would certainly be a good starting point. And then, getting an understanding of what is happening inside of DARPA right now. We see that DARPA resources are being used for criminal investigations, for prosecutions in and outside of Russiagate. I don't think Americans are really on board with that. I don't think anybody really understands why that's happening. So that would be another avenue or another potential arena for them to take a look at that. And then you have your more standard Russiagate topics. And, as much as, we count on John Durham having looked at everything, there are indications that he hasn't. As late as May of last year, he was still fighting Fusion GPS for emails that they were claiming privilege on. So did he ever get the emails? We don't know. And, as much as his report is going to cover, and I'm sure it's going to be a gold mine whenever we get to read it, there's a lot of stuff we're just not going to get, and we're not going to get in a raw form, right? We're going to get it through the lens of what John Durham tells us. And if we could just bring in some of those people and have them tell their story, we can get it straight from their mouth, and we can ask those questions that we're all going to have, because this is probably the worst political situation that we've ever seen. And it's certainly going to get worse the more that we learn, and the more, the public, we don't have to wait for the public to be interested. There's enough here. There's enough work that has to be done that, you can get in front of this. If you're Republican Congress, you can start asking those questions, and you'll be rewarded for it. I truly believe they will find a lot of wrongdoing. And if, we're cynically minded people, so if we just assume that they're just looking for a political edge, they'll find that. There's enough there. They'll be able to make political hay of it. You'd like to think that they would do it for altruistic purposes. They're just trying to do the right thing. But even if not, even if they're just looking for a political axe to grind, they'll find it. Whatever their motivations are or could be, they can find something inside of Russiagate. So, looking at the Alpha Bank allegations, the DNC hack, who knows how much John Durham's looking at that. There's a lot of questions to be asked there. General FBI stuff, and finding out that the FBI had retained and hired Igor Danchenko as a paid confidential human source. We just found that out. And we're talking about 7 years after 2016, and we just found out that he was engaged as a confidential human source. And that's mind-blowing, obviously. Circling back, you talk more about the private actors, and there's a number of those that have been identified around the Alpha Bank issues, certainly Fusion GPS. And I just referenced the fact we don't know if John Durham actually went and got those emails, but there's always been questions about some of the Ukrainians. And that just came to mind out of the discussion we were having earlier. Some of the Ukrainian actors that were asked to sort of compile some reports and some information on some of the Trump people. We'd gotten some indications of that during the first impeachment. So there's so many different tentacles to this. And I think the truth is owed to everybody that had to sit through the media coverage of 3 years, 24/7, saying Trump colluded. And knowing now that is absolutely not the case, and there's no merit to that, and there was never any merit to it, I think we're owed a full accounting. So, MB, what do you think? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm of two minds as well. I do think that Durham is going to put everything that we think we know on its head in a lot of ways, just because he knows so much more than anyone else. And he doesn't leak, so I assume that the Republicans don't know either. So it's really tough to get ahead of yourself, trying to figure out who you want to talk to, what lines you want to go down without, knowing that, Durham's going to show up and it's going to throw everything into, disarray, and, you've wasted some time. But I do think it's a really good idea to at least start lining up your ducks in a row of people you're going to want to talk to no matter what. And you don't necessarily have to do the interviews before Durham shows up, but if you had those things scheduled, if you had all the infrastructure, I don't know exactly how a lot of that stuff works, but I assume that you typically wouldn't just say, I want to talk to so-and-so, and the next day expect them to show up. There's probably a lot of wrangling and legal kind of, stuff with lawyers that's going to have to be worked out. And along those lines, if we feel like, if Durham's going to show up and there's not going to be any more indictments, I don't know how viable this is, but I would say, look, immunize everyone. And I know that's going to be very unpopular because we want people to pay if there's any crimes. But if people are just going to take the Fifth Amendment and not talk, none of this does us any good. And so my first suggestion is to the Republican Congress is to think about just saying, whoever comes in, we're immunizing you. We don't care. We're not going to haggle. We're not going to argue. Every question we ask, you are going to answer. I think that's the best way to get to the bottom of this. And like I said, I know people are going to be upset about that, but I think that's what's going to happen with some people, and they might as well just do it, because you don't know who's going to have the valuable information until they're there, and you can really get under the hood and find out what they know.
And I absolutely understand that sentiment, but I think I'm still in the opposite camp. And I think we agree to disagree on that, because I still think there's criminal liability. And I think looking at this as a conspiracy, you still have runway for a couple more years, because a conspiracy charge is going to go 5 years from last overt act. And there's probably, there's plenty of overt acts we know about, but there's probably a number of overt acts that we don't know about. And you could have another year, you could have another 2 years. And And my advice to Republican Congress would be do this as if John Durham is going to continue this for 5 more years and just do a parallel investigation and find out what happened. You know, the stakes are too high. This isn't a typical criminal case. This is dealing with the highest levels of our government, the institutions that we value. And, to have this many questions 7 years after the fact is unacceptable. So I would say, charge ahead. I would be of the mindset, you should be writing a bunch of subpoenas right now. I mean, you should already have subpoenas out for certainly for documents and files. I would have full funding in place, and I would say do your own technical review, right? Bring in your own technical people and get the server images from the DNC servers. Get all the technical data and just run a parallel investigation and literally just assume Durham's going to do this for 5 more years, do a parallel investigation, and issue all the subpoenas in the world and get all the testimony out there, lock everybody in. And I think there's some different strategies that they might consider, because there are, you usually think about doing this bottom up, right? You think about, okay, let's get the lowest level guy, let's hear what they have to say, and then you work your way up. And I actually think there's some value in actually doing the opposite, because it seems to be the people at the top of these respective allegations that are the worst people, right? It's, the seventh floor of the FBI that seem to be the bad actors. And if anything, you want to lock those people in early. You want to get them in there first and let them lie, right? Because they're skilled at that. They're skilled at spinning stuff. So you let them go out there first, you hear what they have to say, and then you go to the lower levels and you just start ripping apart their testimony. Because if you do the opposite, if you hear from the bottom guys first, when you get to the top guys, they're able to spin it, right? They've heard everything, or they've got some sense of what's been said already, and they're going to be, in a position to kind of spin things or connect things and kind of discount things. So I would bring the top guys first for all the different investigative areas, lock in their testimony, and then I would bring in lower level guys. So, but
I'll
I
push
do
back on that a
understand.
little bit if you don't mind.
Sure. Go ahead.
And only because of this. For one thing, some of these guys have already got a lot of testimony, and they're already locked in. Comey's been in front of Congress, and I think a lot of these guys have that. If you do that, if Jim Comey is your number one witness, the circus is in town. Like you're putting out all the fireworks, you're putting up all the flags, everybody's showing up. I guess you could do it behind closed doors, which is probably the way a lot of this stuff should be done. And again, I'm going to make people unhappy saying that, but you're going to get a lot more results doing things behind closed doors when the cameras aren't rolling and getting these guys, all in campaign mode. So even if you do it behind closed doors, the stuff's going to leak. CNN's going to be all over it. Oh, you're harassing poor, Jim Comey again. He's answered all these questions a million times. I think you spend a lot of your powder up front, where bring in and like you said, I understand the case to be made, but the other case is the classic. Like, look, you can do all this stuff in secret. You can get Brian Auten back in again and spend a day with him. You can, bring in Kevin Kleinsmith, bring in all these guys. And if I had my way, I'd immunize them so they couldn't take the Fifth Amendment, because that's what a lot of these guys are going to do. And then you can know which questions to ask, and you can find out, you can figure out where the pressure points are. And then when it's time to, then when it's time for the circus to come to town, when you have everything lined up, all your facts, bring these guys in and then, hold their feet to the fire. That's my thought. I definitely see your point of view. I think either one has its pluses and minuses, but that's just where I'm coming from.
Yeah. And like, neither one of us know the right way, right? I mean, we're both just a couple guys on Twitter, and, we've done a lot of research on this. Both of us have. So, I definitely see where you're coming from. I think there is definitely value in doing some closed door stuff, but at the same time, I think there are some individuals that could feel the pressure of like a primetime hearing and really put them under the spotlight, maybe for the first time, and see what they have to say. Do they want to be out there in front of the American public taking the Fifth 45 times? I don't mind that. Like, if they want to come up there and they want to take the Fifth, don't let them off, right? Don't let them off after the first question. Make them sit there and take the fifth 45 times. You're not a court, you are Congress, and you can put your questions out there and just let them, ruin their whole, persona,
Mm,
whatever people think of them. I'm totally fine with that. It depends. And I'm not saying do that to everybody. I'm saying doing that strategically if you think that type of pressure might get you some results.
yeah, I
I'm
don't
not
think I don't think it's
like,
going to with sophisticated actors. If Andrew McCabe is on the, decides he's going to take the fifth,
I'm
he's
not
not
saying,
going to care. The
I'm not
kind of
saying
people we're talking about, if their lawyers tell them to do this, they're going to do it. And I don't think they're going to, I think CNN's going to line up and go, all these guys are taking the fifth because they don't want to be railroaded by a runaway special prosecutor, whatever, however they're going to spin this thing.
you can't
I
spin
just
it.
think the whole thing's going to be bulletproof because you're going to be fighting the media the whole way. That's just baked into the cake. And if you turn this into a spectacle of, all right, let's give each congressman 2 minutes to, talk about God knows what for hours on hours on end, and the guy's just saying, no comment, the Fifth Amendment. It's just that it's immediately just appears to the naked eye to the non-political guy that you're trying to get their attention to convince them that this is Watergate, and they're just going to go, this is stupid.
I don't care. I don't care what anybody in the public thinks anymore. This is about right and wrong and get to the bottom of it. I literally don't care. It's not for the viewer at all. It's really to put the right pressure on the right types of people. And it's certainly not going to be a McCabe that you put up there and expect to get, pressure on him to have an impact. But there are some actors, and I think you can make strategic use of pressure. And you know what? You are trying to get some evidence. You're trying to get something off them that can be used. And I think there are some opportunities to do that. I don't worry about what CNN's going to report. They're going to report, the left wing version of anything. And you do a primetime hearing, they're probably not even going to cover it, or they're going to say something like, oh, it didn't live up to expectations or whatever. But you just have to do this at this point. I mean, it's we're so long after the fact, and I'm concerned that so many people don't care about this anymore, or they've gotten so frustrated they just walk away from this, because this is not something you just walk away from. This, there was no DNC hack. I can almost say that with 100% confidence. And once you say that, and we already know everything else has been ripped apart, this becomes the biggest political scandal in American history. And at that point, I mean, I don't care what the news organizations report. I think the Durham report will have a lot of damning evidence in it, but I think it's going to be a starting point. I think there's still going to be a lot of questions that we have to answer. I think this goes up much higher than people are talking about. I think this is much worse than what people are assuming. I think it goes into the Obama White House. I think President Obama knew quite a bit about this. We hear about that report about him being briefed on the Clinton plan. He's a smart guy. He was actually a very hands-on president. He wanted to know about everything because he was really concerned about his image, especially in the media. He didn't want to be caught flat-footed. So exerting that level of control, I have to believe he was told a great deal about what was happening. So,
Well,
still a lot of
that's
questions.
a good point. And I guess my main thing is that the narrative, this needs to be a narrative. This needs to be, if we're not doing anything else, it needs to be on the record that these things happen. And again, yeah, if the public doesn't care, if the public doesn't pay attention, at some point you get what you deserve. And if you don't care that your government's doing these things, then too bad for you. And you're probably going to end up, regretting it at some point. But if you, to accomplish the goal that we're talking about and get this narrative proven and down on the record, I think you have to do it in a smart way. And I think a lot of that is building this thing out and telling the story correctly. Because if you do it wrong, it's going to get very confusing. If you let each individual congressman get involved, it's just going to be a mess. They're not going to understand it. They're not going to tell the story correctly. They're going to focus on all the wrong details. I mean, we know a little bit about that when it's like, here's something really important, and it's just like, no, wait a minute, what about this is what's the huge scandal. It's like, no, that's that's Q bullshit. Don't worry about that. And it's really hard once that train leaves the station. So if I'm thinking about like the J6 hearings, and yeah, they made a lot of mistakes in that, but they were pretty smart about first going and doing all this research and getting all this stuff together, and they didn't have very much, but they turned it into a big political show where they rolled it out in a way that was controlled, and they kept everything in hand, and they put on the show they wanted to put, and they didn't have very much to demonstrate at the end, but they made it seem like they did. And they got, for better or for worse, their story is out there and it's on the record. And yeah, if you dig into it, a lot of it's just crap and it's real thin, but it's out there. And they're, maybe, I don't know if that goes in the history books, but it certainly is. This is their version of things goes in the history books. And I think you got to think of things that way. You got to be able to tell this story correctly. And I don't know exactly how to do that, but I think we do have some good ideas. And I'm glad we're talking about it, because I think that maybe if Congress isn't thinking about it already, they sure as well ought to, because 2 years is not a lot of time.
2 years is not a lot of time. And I think that's the takeaway, right? You have to jump on this now if you want to get this out before the 2024 election. And what we really agree on, I don't think, Congress members should be up there for 2 minutes and rotating and nobody knows what's going on. That's absolutely the wrong way to do this. This should be more like a prosecution. It should be one or two guys up there thing where you're trying to get everybody in the limelight for a couple minutes and really bolster, yourself politically. You should approach this as a prosecution, and it should all be about, having one guy who's really skilled at asking questions, who has researched this or has the access to the right questions, and really in a concerted and strategic way can ask these questions and really hammer home, certain witnesses that are out there. And I think that's the right way to approach it.
I agree with that. Yeah. And I think it's great that Jim Jordan's going to be the chair of this committee. He's a former prosecutor. He's got a really sharp mind. And I think he's put up with enough of that kind of grandstanding crap over the years that he's probably knows exactly that's what he doesn't want to do. So I really do hope that they can work it out so we don't see too much of that.
Absolutely. I agree with that. So in terms of topics, so we have a lot of different topics to choose from. You could say Alpha Bank, you could say, DNC hack, you could say the general, the FBI conduct or misconduct. You could say, DARPA, or maybe like the data collection program that I think is worthy enough to consider or to sort of include, especially with Rodney Joffe sort of being involved there. Or maybe like Fusion GPS or some other topic. And which topic would speak to you? Which one are you most interested in?
Man, that's a good question. And I know in my heart that DOJ, FBI corruption is the most important thing in the big picture for the country. But I keep coming back to the Alpha stuff, to the questions about the DNC hack. That's just where, and maybe that's just because that's where a lot of unanswered questions are, and they're very, very provocative. But I just keep getting dragged back there, and I want to know how that stuff started. I want to know how the Alpha Bank allegations, where they came from. That and if the DNC hack, I think that's huge. And did Georgia Tech, when did they look at that? What was the time frame? All those things, how they play together. And then the DARPA, the surveillance stuff is huge, and it drives me crazy. It's a pet peeve of mine. And maybe that's a subject that's going to have to be tackled separately. But the fact that they're intertwined, it's just like you said, that Rodney Joffe's involved, that all these, that the first thing they did with this technology is inject it into our politics. That makes it a part of this. So yeah, that's where I spend a lot of time. And I know you as well.
Yeah. I get pulled to the Alpha Bank stuff quite a bit too, because as much as we believe, or really we know, there's a lot of other evidence that's been fabricated, whether you talk about the Steele dossier or the concerns that we have about the DNC hack. The Alpha Bank allegations are the one area where the experts say it too. And you're talking about third-party IT firms, independent analysts, and organizations like the CIA and FBI, and they're all essentially saying the same thing, that these allegations are, a result of human manipulation, or, there's one analyst out there that says it's fraud. There's a couple of IT firms that say it's malicious actor that was doing it. So, that's like the one area where you have some of that out there from the experts. So,
there's also, sorry to interrupt, but I was just going to say, there's also huge questions that we don't know the answer to about
Mhm.
how this stuff started, how it started. Like, where did April Lawrence and Tea Leaves, what motivated her at the very beginning? Like, I don't think she's ever been deposed. Maybe Durham's talked to her. I don't know, but that's a huge thing. That's kind of like, where did all this start?
Absolutely. And you're not just talking about a random group of cyber researchers. As we're finding out, and as we just referenced with Rodney Joffe, some of these individuals are connected to the highest levels of our government and our most sensitive programs. Rodney Joffe held or holds a top secret SCI clearance. So it's like, this is supposed to be the guy we trust the most. And for him to hold that clearance and then to think that we have to give credibility to the statements that have been made, that he felt like he needed to disseminate this through an intermediary anonymously, and he couldn't just call up the many FBI people or intelligence officers or whoever and just say, hey, I'm a world-class DNS expert with access to a lot of different data. I found something that's kind of weird, and I don't really know what it is, but I think you should check it out. You could absolutely expect him to be able to do that and have no concerns whatsoever that would result in blowback on his credibility or his standing. I mean, if he finds DNS activity, they're absolutely going to look at it. If Rodney Joffe's on the phone saying, "Hey, I found something," they're going to look at it. And one of the things that really concerns me is that he did talk to an FBI agent. He talked to Tom Grasso, and Tom Grasso took that information and he held Joffe's identity as anonymous, and he said that he had gotten anonymous information for various portions of the Alpha Bank allegations, and that includes, IP addresses and things of that nature. So, in effect, Tom Grasso, that an FBI agent, was lying to the FBI as well, and that's obviously concerning, and that feeds into the broader context of FBI abuses and misconduct.
Yeah, and I think Rodney Joffe at one point said he was never consulted about the Alpha Bank allegations by the FBI, and that might be flatly false, or at least a word game, because he certainly was involved in with Grasso. And yeah, that was always a dog that didn't bark for me. Is this guy that's winning awards for the FBI that has Jim Comey on his cell phone, and he doesn't deliver these allegations. He backdoors it through a Democratic lawyer that has a buddy in the FBI. And, it's that is not the sign of a an honest. I don't know. I don't want to say person, but not. It doesn't look good on its face.
Yep. And Cody pops in and he says, McConaughey, who was just indicted just recently last week, I believe. Obviously we have a lot of questions about him as well. And I saw Bongino raise some of those questions a few days ago, but that includes the DNC hack investigation, the Alpha Bank allegation. So, we all presume that John Nerman is done, but who knows? Maybe McConaughey has some information he wants to offer up. So, yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, you have to assume that Durham's going to continue for a while, if not just to clean up McConaughey before he issues a report. So
we'll see. The timing's definitely interesting. And Dave Bain, thank you. I was thinking of Trey Gowdy, not Jim Jordan. So thanks for correcting me on that.
yep. So Alpha Bank. So we say like that's the topic that hits us most. So if you wanted to interview people, and this is not the question of whether or not Congress should interview people, this is a question of who would you interview if you were Congress and you wanted to look at this issue for Alpha Bank? Who would you bring in?
Yeah, man. I mean, obviously you're going to want to talk to Rodney Joffe, and he's going to take the fifth, but any of these guys could. April Lorenzen would be on the top of my list. David Dagan for sure, because those two were sort of at the bottom at the beginning of this, working together, and had David Dagan has talked to he cooperated with Durham, and we don't know what they talked about exactly because all that still hasn't been revealed. So that's learning what Durham knows is probably a good first step there. But those are my big two, and Manos is I think in play as well.
Yeah, so like David Dagan, he's got an immunity agreement, so it's not like he's somebody that you can absolutely bring in because he can't take the fifth on anything. So that would
Right.
be good. I think I would go a little bit deeper. I think some of the people that Rodney Joffe works with were actually tasked to varying degrees in looking at this and assisting some of these allegations that were being put together. And this isn't squarely just solely within the Alpha Bank stuff. There are some other pieces of this, like the list of Trump associates. But Jared Novick, we saw him at the Sussman trial. He was the CEO of BitVoyant. I would definitely bring him in. There was two researchers that he named that they were sort of in contact with. I think Lori Stotler was one, and drawing blank on another one. But those two individuals were also sort of in that Crimson Rhino report writing and research project. So I would definitely bring in those individuals. There's a guy named Rory Jaegerman at Packet Forensics. I would bring him in. Just, some of that is sort of fishing. Like Rory, I have no idea how much he knows, but I would definitely bring him in and just say, hey, what conversations were you having around the Alpha Bank allegations? Let's see, who else? Raymond Salino. And that could be
absolutely.
something that feeds into multiple investigations. And obviously we talked about sort of that data collection program out there. Salino seems to be at the forefront of all those different companies. So I would bring him in and kick the tires on. I mean, how much did he know about what was going on? So I think that's 4 individuals. And I think somebody like Jared Novick could give you a couple more names that maybe you'd want to speak to. And he was very cooperative at trial. So he'd be a great person to bring in, I think.
No, I'm blanking on the name, but who worked for DARPA and then moved over to Georgia Tech?
Angelos Karamitis.
Yeah, that'd be a good name, because I think there is a lot in DARPA that needs to be sussed out. And I mean, they're lying about, they were making false statements about what Georgia Tech was up to. That it certainly needs to be gotten to the bottom of.
Yeah, that is right. So for people that haven't been following us for very long, in April, I think it was, based on reporting and documents that Margot Cleveland and I had come up with, there were some questions being raised about DARPA's role, and Jerry Dunleavy got DARPA on record denying that they had approved any work related to the Alpha Bank allegations or the DNC hack investigation, and that turned out to be a lie. So definitely want to get to the bottom of what was going on at DARPA. I think Karamitis is an important name in there. Somebody like Christopher Schneck, I think, would be a really good name, and I don't know how much. Again, that's another situation where we're fishing a little bit, but I'm fishing with a little bit of information. And I think Schneck might know a little bit about what was happening. So I would throw that name in there too. Let's see. Anybody else on Alpha Bank? Oh, like Elgene Camp. You could say like Elgene Camp and some of those other researchers like Christopher Davis. Susan Landau might be an interesting one. I would definitely talk to her.
Yeah, Elgene Camp. We think talked to the FBI at one point, potentially in Chicago, and we'd like to know who she talked to, what that conversation was, if it happened.
Yep. Yeah, there might be a few others. I mean, there certainly were a few other individuals named. Oh, you could talk about the Senate side. I didn't think of that. So, you had Daniel Jones in there, who mounted an investigation on behalf of the Senate. So I would definitely talk to Daniel Jones. And then that leads you into Mikey Dickerson and Matt Weaver. So those would be 2 other names for sure. And then I don't know if there's any other names that work for Daniel Jones that wouldn't be on our list already. But obviously, like Dickerson, you're going to want to talk to him about many different things, because he was a contractor for Fusion GPS as well. So obviously, you could schedule a couple of days with him potentially. Let's see. So that's 3 other names. So I think that covers the Alpha Bank topic. Let's see who else. Fusion GPS. So if we wanted to get to the bottom of Fusion GPS and the dossier and all the allegations that came through Fusion GPS or other organizations like that, who would you bring in?
Well, the nice thing about Glenn Simpson is he's already on record, so you can go back. And I actually was looking through his testimony the other day, just to try to, he didn't say very much, unfortunately, but guys like that, you can start to poke out inconsistencies, hopefully. So him and Frisch's partner. Those are the obvious. They founded the company, and what my big question for them, though, and maybe this would require some other people to be brought in, is where did the name Sergey Milian develop and get to Christopher Steele? Because I think there's really good indication that they gave Sergey Milian's name to Steele. Steele didn't develop it on his own, and everything that. My question is, where did they get Sergey Milian's name? Who was talking to them that came up on the radar screen? Because that leads down a very interesting rabbit hole.
Well, it absolutely does, because I think Milian also appeared on the list of Trump associates that Rodney Joffe effectively gave to the FBI. So it's like, who gave the list to Christopher Steele? Who gave or Sergey Milian's name to ABC News and to Rodney Joffe? And what were they really trying to do? Because it's very obvious that they were setting him up to be a fall guy. They have some type of information that, they thought he would be the right guy to pin this on.
And the timing's so interesting that just Sergey tweeted this week that he had moved to New York from Atlanta, and he was given a new handler, and he was not happy with the treatment he was getting there. And did he burn some bridges with the FBI that somehow that backdoored back to Fusion GVS? It's just a theory, but the timing of all this stuff is just all so interesting. It just kind of leads itself to these questions.
And one name we haven't talked about in a while is Alexandra Chalupa. And while she wasn't, I don't know that we have confirmed that she was associated with Fusion GPS. She was certainly looking into Manafort, and she was sort of in that same sphere, in that she was talking to different Ukrainians that were later compiling information for Fusion GPS purposes. So I would definitely bring her in and kick the tires on what she has to say about some of this.
Yeah, that's a good name.
Yeah. Okay, we haven't talked about the DNC hack. That's probably the most important topic of anything. And who would you bring in for the DNC hack investigation?
Well, I'm going to have the same answer. Sean Henry has some testimony on the record, so I would want to sort of dig through that and see if there's anything that is not consistent that we know of now. Geez, I think I want to know when Georgia Tech was tasked with looking at that hack, because the timing depends. If it was later than we think, it's not really that interesting. If it was earlier than we think, then all those people in that chain of command, you want to talk to all of them, because it's how did this get there and why? And so it's a lot of the same people from Georgia Tech, but also certainly some of the people from the DNC or the FBI end of things.
Yeah, so that was a good answer. You probably stole mine. Yeah, the Georgia Tech researchers who were involved in the Alpha Bank allegations, we know now that they went on to work for Special Counsel Mueller. We know to varying extents that they did work on the DNC hack attribution. They wrote a white paper on it. They were providing work product through DARPA to the Department of Justice and Special Counsel Mueller. So absolutely, definitely 100% want to talk to them. Want to talk to the DARPA people that were serving as intermediaries, and that could be Karamitis, that could be Schneck. There might be, Jonathan Smith is another name from DARPA they might want to talk to. But absolutely, there's this allegation out there we have some information on that Rodney Joffe actually has a role in the DNC hack attribution. So I would definitely want to talk to him. I would bring in Al Perlovich, and Sean Henry was a good name. But getting to the bottom of the imaging of the servers itself, because this is a big problem for me, in that, they were on site, and we talked about this before a couple of weeks ago, MB. It doesn't look like the imaging of the servers actually happened when they did the remediation event in June 2016. So that's really concerning, because
it's crazy. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and then from the point in June until at least mid-October, if not later, we don't know, they apparently did not provide any forensic or technical data on the hack to the FBI. All they provided, apparently, was a redacted CrowdStrike report. And I'm not misspeaking there. They actually gave a report to the FBI that had redactions in it. And that's just mind blowing. I can't believe they would do that. But it just opens up a lot of questions. Why? Why didn't that information get to the FBI? And you look at so many events that happened before they'd really confirmed, anything about the hack. They didn't even have the data to do it. So when the federal government, the Department of Homeland Security and ODNI released a joint statement on October 7, 2016, that officially attributed the hack of the DNC to Russia, they didn't even have the data to do that. Nothing from CrowdStrike. All they presumably had would have been some information, maybe from the NSA, maybe from private actors that, maybe some of the names that we were just talking about, maybe some of that information came from Rodney Joffe or, David Dakin and Monson Tonkakis. We don't know, but that's where the question comes in. When did those private actors sort of get engaged in this, and when did they provide information on the DNC hack to the FBI? And that's going to help answer some of those questions about, what the government was using in their attribution, and certainly the ICA report that feeds into that question as well. Because, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that the other issue is how much did CrowdStrike know, because there might have been stuff going on outside of, if you're going to talk to Georgia Tech, you might not. I'm sure CrowdStrike's like, we've got this, or we're taking care of it. And if the third party is being brought in, they might not like that. So I think one name that would definitely be somebody to talk to is Michael Sussman.
Yes. Yeah, that's probably the first name that we should have said, right? Because he was the point guy for the DNC in looking at the hack, and he has a long relationship with Rodney Joffe himself. So, even if you accept that it's a real hack, you could almost envision a scenario where he talks to Rodney Joffe just for the hell of it, just to say, hey, you're a technical expert. What do you think about the hack? And what kind of data are you looking at? So getting some of those questions answered, I think, is very important. I think that's a good point, MD.
Yeah, and one thing about these interviews we're talking about potentially in Congress, and I wish King was here because he could fill us in on some of this stuff, but they don't recognize attorney-client privilege necessarily. There's a lot of privileges you can't claim in front of Congress, and especially if you're immunized, I know that I think it's probably one of those open areas of law. But if you go back and listen, like if you read back through like the Sussman transcripts, or not, I'm sorry, the Simpson transcripts, he's constantly saying, I can't talk about that. It's privileged information. This isn't even a lawyer thing. This is just contractual NDA kind of stuff. And they keep telling him, we don't recognize that. So they can at least turn the screws on these guys and say, just because you have some kind of privilege here, we don't recognize that you're going to answer our questions.
Well, I think they could definitely think about that for classified information. I think they can use subpoena power to compel the production of classified documents, and that might include the CrowdStrike reports for one, and certainly other technical information that they had to have used for the October 7th, 2016 statement. And then, they should use their powers to read that into the record and declassify it, essentially. That was your idea. I'm ripping that off from you, MB. Or, if they just read it into the record, they're perfectly authorized to do that. So, if they really want to be like the church committee, who exercise unilateral declassification authority over documents, over the objections of the president, they should do that. They should absolutely do that. Get the information out there. And, they have some excellent investigators in Congress. I'm sure they do. But, if you put that information out there, you also have a bunch of people who have way too much time on their hands, who've been looking at this for a long time. And, some of us can probably make some of those connections a little bit if they just give us the information to do some of that.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, that was good. DNC hack absolutely should be a focus. I think they should absolutely engage some technical experts. I mean, don't spare, any money on it. Like, just bring them in, right? Bring in some of those technical experts, and do a full investigation in parallel. Let's determine, was there actually a hack? Was there, any issues with the attribution for the hack? And let's put all the questions out there. Finally, it's been 7 years. You don't have to worry about giving information to Russia or whatever. Like, let's just put it all out there. Everybody can sleep well at night knowing that the attribution was done right. I think that would be great. There's nothing wrong with that, by the way. Like, you don't have to go on a witch hunt as the Republican Congress, and you have to find wrongdoing. I'd be perfectly happy if they do all this work and you just confirm that everything was done correctly on the attribution, and everybody can go home and we can all have our questions answered. So, let's see what else. FBI. I mean, that's just such a broad topic. Let's call it FBI or the government or the State Department, or basically like a broad bucket. Let's include Obama in there too. So, any names that really stand out to you, MB?
My list is going to be some of the lower down people, and especially ones we haven't really heard from. And some of them are like, I think I'd like to hear from Kevin Kleinsmith, and not because I think that he has a ton to tell factually, but I'd like to hear his description of what was going on, because he was there for so long between the opening of Crossfire Hurricane through the Mueller investigation. And so he knew where the bodies were buried. He knew, there's people coming in and going all the time. So people like Kleinsmith and Brian Auten, they're there the entire time. And if you get them talking, and hopefully you can get them to at least, give you a sense of what the players were up to, what the thought processes were. And if it's an adversarial interview, it's going to be tougher, but I think they're still really invaluable to get a sense of exactly what the thought processes were. And
I think we're absolutely on the same page as far as the FBI. Like, I want to hear from the lower level people, especially because we have testimony now that the seventh floor seems to be where the problem is. So, we've already heard from some of those guys under congressional testimony. Let's bring in the lower level people. People like Allison Sands and some of these names we got at trial, Ryan Gaynor, and some of these guys that were saying, no, this is garbage and we shouldn't even be doing anything with this. Those are the people I want to hear from.
We learned so much at the Danchenko trial just from Brittany Herzog and the special agent Adams, was her name? I can't remember, but yeah, those were exactly the kind of people that they're just good employees that see bad things happening, and they might not be able to point out crimes, but they can point out things that are against policy and things that really bothered them, to the point where, they're filing complaints and going to the IG and things like that. I guarantee there's more people out there that were doing that we probably haven't heard about. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, there's probably 30 names we could just brainstorm and come up with in the FBI that have flown in and out of this story. And some of them are more familiar than others, but like, every one of those people should be talked to.
Absolutely. I mean, as far as like a first round of interviews, I think somebody like, Soma or Pianka might be as high as you'd want to go. Like, Pianka has involvement in everything. Soma has involvement in everything. Gata is a name that we heard a lot. Yeah, absolutely bring those guys in. But other than that, like, I want to hear from these other names that came up at the Sussman trial or the Danchenko trial. Let's hear from the people that opened up Danchenko as a confidential human source, that used his information. The people that had concerns with using him in those investigations. Let's put it all out there, especially, putting it all out there. You go into the State Department, you could bring in somebody like Weiner and finally get some questions asked to him. The Obama administration, man, that might be somewhere I do go high. Like, there's not a lot of low level people in the White House, but you do have to bring in somebody like President Obama, and you have to answer the question of what he was being told at various points in the investigation. I mean, you don't have to do it maliciously. You don't have to, accuse him of wrongdoing or anything like that. Let's just get testimony from him and find out, what was he being briefed in early August 2016? What was he was briefed about this plan from Hillary Clinton, from John Brennan. Okay, what was said in that meeting? Let's get the notes that were taken at that meeting. Crossfire Hurricane was opened up. All of a sudden there's 4 names. General Flynn, mysteriously, there's no information on him on why he really should have been opened up on. So, let's find out around those dates, what was President Obama being told? What was he being told in October when the joint attribution statement was being made? Because we have testimony from Jay Johnson saying that President Obama had to approve that attribution statement himself. So, okay, around those dates, let's find out what was President Obama being told. What was the president's understanding of the evidence in support of attributions to Russia for the DNC hack, and then obviously the ICA. I mean, it's very concerning that Obama would order the ICA report to be constructed on December 9th. All of a sudden, 20 days later, it's done, and surprise, surprise, it blames Russia for everything. There's this massive hack and influence campaign. So let's get all those briefings. And then obviously we have that really weird email from Susan Rice where she says, she's memorializing a meeting on the very last day that occurred, a couple of weeks before her last day, saying Obama said, do everything by the book. And it's like, really? Like, why did you have to write that in an email to yourself? So let's bring in Susan Rice and, some of these other individuals, and, let's put it all on the record. And I think that would be good to have.
Yeah, that was clearly a CYA memo, and I think Susan Rice is a great idea. Powers, there's a few. You're not going to get Barack Obama, and there's actually a legitimate separation of powers issue there that he's going to claim executive privilege, and it's gonna stick. So, unfortunately,
if the Democrats are doing this, they would get him. Right? If the Democrats,
I don't know, they didn't get Donald Trump.
They were going to. They tried
to, but they, again,
they were pretty close to getting them. And you know what? I would go for it. And who knows? Maybe Obama doesn't fight it. Maybe he wants to come in there and say, I didn't know. I didn't know what was wrong when I did the things that I did. But we like certainly his records, like all the record keeping around the president, which is extensive. You definitely have to compel that. You have to get that out there because that will memorialize pretty accurately what was, what the president was told. You almost don't need the president if you can get that stuff. So,
yeah, it's just internal deliberation stuff. They're always going to claim executive privilege on. If it's factual things,
executive privilege. I mean, they've absolutely ripped that to shreds.
It's true, but if you have a Democrat president to uphold it, you're not going to get any of it. Now, if a Republican gets elected in 2 years, then it's a different story. But for the next 2 years, the Biden administration is not going to give up any of that kind of stuff, and you're not going to get a court to agree to it because they're pretty much in the right.
It's within your congressional oversight function. I think you could definitely make a case that you need to hear from them, and you need all the evidence that governs the decisions that were made by the executive branch of the government. And that includes, the executive orders that, Obama made, banning certain Russians and all that stuff. All that falls within the oversight function. So I think there's a case to be made. I think they can do it. Definitely need the records around the president. Some of the cabinet members, Susan Rice, some of that stuff. I think all that has to be on the table. And if that's a non-starter for a Congress member, they probably shouldn't be on the committee. Like, they don't get it. They don't get how bad this is. And maybe they need to spend more time, looking at Full Nelson's feed or, Undercover Hubert or some of the stuff that we've come up with, because this is bad and this deserves a full investigation. So we haven't talked about Mueller at all, dude.
Yeah.
We didn't even talk about that when we mentioned the FBI, but everything was destroyed. Everything was done by the time Mueller was even appointed. So it's really, really concerning that he could be in there for as long as he was, because when he walked in the first day and he said, okay, give me everything you got, it's like, oh yeah, that guy said he was lying. The primary subsource, he said he was lying. He said he made it all up, but we made him a confidential human source to hide him from Congress. And then Mueller's like, okay, what else you got? And it's like, we have we have this black ledger on Manafort we think is, it's forged, but we're going to use it to go get a warrant. And he's like, okay, that sounds good. And then he's like, what do you got on Flynn? And he's like, well, he kind of misspoke, and our records really suck on it. We don't really think, he was lying, but we could make a case on it if you want. And he's like, okay, that sounds good too. We'll make that stick. We'll withhold the 302 from him the entire time. We'll just make it work. Papadopoulos, he misstated, by a couple of weeks when he spoke to missued. Ah, yeah, we'll make a case on him too. It's like, it's so ridiculous, everything that they did. And they knew on day one there was no Russian collusion, because the FBI are not stupid. As much as, they try to get a pass, they had nothing. Probably by January 2017, everything had been debunked. But certainly by March 2017, there's nothing. And that's when Comey actually went to Congress and said they were doing an investigation into Trump. And you have to look at that and say, Comey knew. Comey knew this was garbage when he said that, when he announced that to Congress. So he was doing that for political purposes, not out of necessity for anything. So, if anything, he was hoping to precipitate his own termination by saying that publicly. And then, he was just hoping that a special counsel would be appointed. They all thought, Trump would be impeached and removed, probably for obstruction. So, wiping the phones. I mean, we haven't talked about that with Mueller in a long time, but you have to put in your password wrong 10 times, and it's locked. It locks you out for hours at a time just to erase the phone. And apparently they did that dozens of times. And as
Andrew
we
Weissman
find
did
out,
it twice.
yeah,
Once you're an idiot, twice, come on.
Yeah. Yeah, but as we've recently found out, the fact that you have somebody like David Dakin and Manos Antonakakis, who were at the center of the Alpha Bank allegations, we know now that they went and worked for Special Counsel Mueller. It's like, okay, show me the phones that have discussions about their work product, right? Are those the phones they got wiped, or do they have evidence of it? That's one of the questions I want to know, because if those are the phones that got wiped, it's like, okay, you knew you were trying to hide that evidence. You didn't want the people at the center of the Alpha Bank allegations to be discovered, in discovery for congressional investigators later. I mean, that would be my concern. So,
yeah, and Weissman's defense of that really took off with the media was so disingenuous and silly. That was, oh, no, all that stuff's backed up. All our emails are, yeah, sure, but nobody, if you want to talk in secret, you're using all kinds of different apps, all that kind of stuff isn't backed up. We have no idea it was on your phones. And it's more worrisome that he would make such a stupid argument like that than anything else. It's like, look, you guys are prosecutors and investigators. If a criminal defendant told you, you don't need my phone, it's backed up to the cloud, you'd be like, I don't care about that. Why'd you destroy your phone? That's the question.
Yeah. Yeah, such a mess with Mueller. I mean, obviously Mueller himself, like, it's whatever, just leave him alone. But everybody else on the Mueller team, you got to you got to ask them some questions. I think they're warranted. Getting a full understanding of that, and that's more of a scenario where I'm sure Durham's report is going to cover it, right? But I want to hear from those guys themselves. I want to hear what they say in response to questions on it. I assume Durham's going to have everything covered on that angle, but I want to hear from them. So, what else? We haven't covered?
The Clintons.
Clintons? Oh boy.
I want to talk to Cody Shearer.
We haven't mentioned Clinton yet. Yeah, I mean, obviously, Cody Shearer. I'm very, very curious about his dossier and hearing from him about when he wrote it and specific sections, because within his dossier is one allegation that is the Alpha allegations, essentially. I mean, it doesn't reference Alpha Bank by name, but it says something to the effect that there's a secret communications channel between Donald Trump and Putin using a cutout. So it's like, okay, that's the Alpha Bank allegation. And there's some reporting out there. I shouldn't call it reporting. There's a couple pieces out there that suggest that he wrote that in the April to May timeframe. And Lee Smith's excellent article from like 5 years ago, it was 5 years ago on it. He quotes a conversation that apparently Bob Baer had, who's a former intelligence analyst who was working for CNN for a number of years. Apparently he was talking to Cody Shearer in April or May 2016, and he had relayed the piece on the Alpha allegation to Cody Shear, and Bob Barrett said that he had gotten that from contacts at the New York Times. So nailing down some of that time frame is really, really important, because the pings didn't even start until May 6th. And Rodney Joffe and some of these other researchers say, they didn't even look for the pings until, June 13th or 14th, or I should say probably 14th, right after the news that DNC hack broke publicly. So nailing down when Cody Shear knew about it is obviously going to be really indicative of, just how much the Clintons knew, which I think they knew all about it. But
Yeah, just the idea that there's someone running around with a proto dossier before Christopher Steele is even employed is, I mean, that was always something that we're like, this is incredible. Like, like this was the dry run, and it's like, no, this is a bad guy to do this. We need some more official, like, first of all, we need more more cutouts and whatever. But it's just crazy that so Sidney Blumenthal, somebody else we should probably talk to.
yeah,
He's in that same circle. Would have knowledge if there was, if this stuff did flow down from higher above, he'd be the guy.
Yeah, and Dave says Strobe Talbot, and yeah, that'd be another name. Certainly ahead of Brookings, and he was asking some questions to Susan Rice, I think it was, about the dossier, at a pretty unusual time where he shouldn't have known about the dossier, and I don't recall exactly when that was. I think it was September 2016. So yeah, Strobe Talbot could absolutely have some information. You definitely want to ask him about Igor Danchenko and Fiona Hill. I think you could ask him a few questions about that. Clinton World, Sidney Blumenthal, that was a good name. Yeah. Oh, like Jake Sullivan, obviously. Jake Sullivan, Paul Meary, Robbie Mook.
Yeah.
Sounds like Robbie Mook might be willing to share a little bit more than the others, so I would definitely call him in. Let's see. I think that's pretty much it. I mean, I think we pretty much well covered it. We could also obviously include some of the spying, data collection, DARPA, what are they doing? But you and I pretty well covered that in our last talk. So
yeah, the only other thought I had just that occurred to me is I want to know who. So we're just envisioning this circle of information and bullshit that's flowing, going from making stuff up to getting in the newspapers to getting into the FBI, and that journalist component. I want to know who Fusion GPS was paying potentially to print these stories, and I think there are ways to find that out. If you're willing to put the subpoenas out there and get that information.
I think that'd be great. I think you could. I think you're spot on. I think you subpoena all the bank accounts from Fusion GPS, and I don't think it's unreasonable at all to subpoena the bank accounts of the journalists. Like, you can't get them on record about who their sources are, but you can absolutely subpoena their bank accounts and find out if there are any unusually large, transactions flowing into their accounts. I think that's well within their oversight function.
Fool Nelson wants to talk to Hillary.
Yeah.
Do we want to hear from Hillary?
Yeah,
not heard enough.
Call her up. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good list. Any other topics we haven't covered, MB?
Probably, but I think we hit the high points.
Yeah, hour into this, I think we're mojo's starting to fade a little bit. Any other topics? Anything else going on, MB?
I don't know. Yeah, there's just been some interesting stuff this week with the McGonigal. I think I don't know if there's anything there. Some of these things are just like intriguing, and whether there's connections or not, it's cool. Why don't I think they should subpoena Fool Nelson, get him up there. You can just explain the whole thing to everyone. We could just cut out all the nonsense.
Hey, I think it'd be great if Congress called up Fool Nelson and maybe Uncover Huber, some of those guys, and just bring him in. I mean, just pay him, $300,000 or $400,000 or $500,000 a year, and a couple $1 million bonus, and bring him in there and let him let them run it. I mean, especially, I think Undercover Huber's probably a lawyer. I mean, he's probably actually well situated to run an investigation like that. There's no shame in it. I mean, all these other Congress members and stuff, if you're not going to let them be fully dedicated to Russiagate on a daily basis, outsource it. Absolutely. If you're trying to saddle up, a congressional staffer to look at Russiagate and perform other functions on a day-to-day basis, like, you're wrong. You're just
No way.
dead wrong. You can't expect them to look into everything here and then go do something else. Like, this is gonna swamp them. Absolutely. There's so much information that they have to consume, and they have to have sessions where they sort of like this, where they can bounce ideas off of people who know what they're talking about a little bit, and come up with a little bit more information, because it's too much for one person to figure out. It's too much for a couple people to figure out.
Well, I'll give you a great example. Just when Durham got started, and Barr and Durham were looking at this stuff, and they immediately went to Italy and went to Mifsud, and they wasted, not only did they waste time, but they sort of wasted some of their reputational energy by running down something that was already known to be a dry hole. And I'm sure a lot of people are gratified that they actually did bother to run it down, find out for sure. Maybe, I'm sure there's still people that don't think that's true, but whatever. It's just like, look, you have only this much time, resources, money, energy, whatever. You can't waste it going after stuff that you could be already told, look, that's not important. Don't look at that. Look over here.
Yeah, and Fool brings up an outstanding name, and that gives me a couple other ideas too. But Liz, who was working for the CIA, who was intimately involved in various aspects of the investigation. But you talk about the ICA and sort of that sphere of closely connected people to John Brennan, and she's right in there. So talking to somebody like Liz would be a great idea, and I'm glad Fool Nelson popped in. I wish you would join us and come and speak a little bit, because certainly some of those CIA names and some of those quasi fusion groups. You talk about CTIIC, and you have names like Tom Donahue in there, which is a really interesting name for me, because Lisa Monaco kind of stood up that whole fusion cell. And then Tom Donahue's in there. And then Tom Donahue pops up in FOIA documents that I have evidencing a relationship with Rodney Joffe. So it's like, is that an avenue? And you have to go fishing a little bit, but that would be a good spot to fish. And the White House is running this text. That's right. So that Liz pops up in the Strzok page text messages right around, I think, on the exact same day that Strzok was talking about the White House is running this. They're talking about a car full of people, and that Liz is driving. I think it is. We could probably pull up the text message, but on that exact same day in that same time frame, Strzok is apparently in communication with Liz. So really important time frame. I would definitely talk to her and anybody that was in that car for sure. Let's see, anybody else? Yeah, I mean, you should probably just subpoena, like, some of these names we don't even know, right? Some of these other fusion cells, the analysts that were actually working with John Brennan on the construction of the ICA, and certainly there's some reports of analysts working for the CIA that disagree, that were doubting the work product of John Brennan, what they were coming up with. You'd want to hear from all those people, and you have to probably issue some subpoenas to get some names to go ahead and bring those people in. But
if they get their objections into the record somehow, they probably have a lot more to say.
Absolutely. And those are the types of people you really want.
Yeah. And Horowitz did a pretty good job, and he left out a lot of stuff. He didn't have a lot of power to do certain things, but he gave us a lot of names in the DOJ and the FBI. But the CIA, anything outside of his purview, there's a lot of names that we just don't know the names. We know people we have quotes and things, but we don't know who they are necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, you could revisit, there's a lot of different public reporting that quote unnamed people, but one of the first reports that I remember was like this Reuters report from like early January 2017, where they're talking about 5 the CIA has identified 5 Russians responsible for the hack of the DNC. And that's early January 2017. So finding out what the CIA knew around that time would obviously be very important. So digging in, the NSA, CIA, all these punchy, catchy names, but there's a lot of unnamed analysts in there that you definitely want to speak to. So.
Yeah, I figure there's a lot of pushback that never came to light because there wasn't an IG report, or if there was, we'd never ever know about it. But I think there would be a lot of, there's all this talk that the CIA was not happy with any of this and was not on board with what the FBI was pushing. It's like, all right, well, what does that mean? Who are we talking about? Who is making that drawing that conclusion? And yeah, that's a tough one because it's just, these guys they're going to push back. They're secret agents, blah, blah, blah. But you got to talk to them. You got to figure out a way to get them and get some answers.
I think one of the last points that I have is that, if you're a congressional investigator, if you happen to be watching this instead of like enjoying your family on Wednesday night, one of the things you really have to keep in mind, I mean, you basically have to give no credence to anything the FBI or any agencies tell you, because they have hidden behind sources and methods to hide Igor Danchenko, to hide Rodney Joffe, to hide another individual who brought alpha allegations, and probably another series of allegations that we probably haven't even heard of yet. And if they want to claim sources and methods and they got to withhold information, take them to court. Strip away their funding, hold people in contempt, whatever you have to do, because we just need these answers. I think it's insane, 7 years into this, and we literally just found out that Igor Danchenko was a paid confidential human source since March of 2017. And obviously we had the Horowitz report, and I think that was a well done report, but we had Horowitz out there, doing an investigation for a couple of years, and he didn't tell us that Danchenko was a confidential human source. He didn't tell us about Rodney Joffe. He didn't tell us about all these different things that
he might not have known.
Well, yeah, and then U.S. Attorney Jeff Jensen was appointed. He was brought in, and he came up with a whole bunch of stuff on the General Flynn case and all that stuff. So, evidence is being withheld from the people that have been looking at this, and I worry about cases like, the Mueller indictment of the 12 GRU operatives. Has John Durham been able to get in there and really looked at everything? I don't know. I would assume so, but all these different avenues where evidence has been withheld, it's really, really concerning. What else? Anything else, MB? Been going for a long time now.
Yeah, I'm pretty dry, but
yeah.
If anybody, I agree. If anybody in Congress happens to somehow get a hold of this, stumble on this, we've got plenty we can help you with, plenty we can say. I say this every time, and I'm sure people think, yeah, why are you making an idiot out of yourself? But you don't know. And if you don't, you don't offer, then, no risk it, no biscuit.
I mean, hell, getting the security clearance is pretty expensive, but it wouldn't be so bad if, get a couple of these guys security clearances and bring them in, let some of us help you out. We kind of live this stuff, and the people that are really passionate about this stuff are probably the ones that you need on an investigation like this, because you're going to get your full workday from somebody like that.
I think some of us have been doing this basically full time.
Yeah, some of us should probably find some other hobbies, but
with a full-time job, I think.
Yeah. Like, I know there's been nights I've come home from really long work days, and it's been like midnight or 1 a.m. and it's like I gotta read that report, or I gotta read whatever document that is before I can go to sleep. So
for sure.
Yeah. All right, MB, I can't think of anything else, buddy. So I think it's really great. I mean, what we're really trying to do here is build a platform, and we have a lot that's in front of us. So we're going to have the binder Russiagate documents, obviously John Durham's report. I've got a bunch of FOIA documents that are coming over the next 4 to 5 weeks, I think. I actually got a batch today. They're just not all that interesting. Yeah, I mean, we're going to have a bunch of other nights, and then we're probably looking at a couple years of questions and trying to get more documents after Durham drops his report. So a lot in front of us. I think it's really kind of neat to have a platform like this where we can share documents and still has sort of the same feel as a Twitter Spaces. So yeah, really appreciate you coming on, NB, and
Sure.
going to end this one here. And I hope everybody, if you enjoy this kind of stuff, maybe share and subscribe, and we will see you again soon with another video. So have a good night. I'll end it here.
Thanks, everybody. Good night.